I'm Laura Ashworth, and I'm 31 years old. My parents just told me I have to pay for my sister's wedding or disappear from their lives forever. Yes, you heard that right. An ultimatum, delivered during Sunday dinner at my own dining table, in my own house, the one I've been paying the mortgage on while they've lived here for 3 years. Madison was sitting right there with that usual smug smile, the one she's worn since childhood every time she got something I didn't. That smile that says, "It's fine, I win again." But first, let me tell you how we got here. My parents moved in when my dad, Mr. Ashworth, lost his job at a prestigious downtown accounting firm 3 years ago. They said it would be temporary. Sure, temporary like a cavity, right? They arrived with 2 suitcases and somehow managed to redecorate my entire living room with their old furniture. My mother, Mrs. Ashworth, immediately started rearranging the kitchen cabinets because, according to her, efficiency is important, darling. My dad took over the home office for his job search, which apparently consisted mostly of watching golf tutorials on YouTube all day. I should mention that at 31, I've been working since I was 16. I paid for college with scholarships and 3 jobs. I finished law school at 25 with a mountain of debt, and I spent the last 6 years building my own legal practice. When I was finally named senior associate 2 years ago, I thought I'd finally achieved some stability. Wrong. The first red flag should have been when they gave Madison my primary suite. My primary suite. "She needs more space for her things," Mom explained while I just stood there holding my own laundry basket. I ended up in what used to be my guest room, sleeping on a twin bed I'd bought for visiting friends. But hey, I'm an attorney. I can adapt, right? Wrong again. The bills started piling up immediately. Suddenly, my electric bill tripled because someone needed the house kept at a chilly 72 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. My grocery budget exploded because my dad developed a taste for everything organic, and my mom decided she was now a gourmet chef. When I brought up the extra expenses, Mom patted my hand and said, "Oh, honey, family takes care of family. You understand?" Yes, I understood. I understood perfectly that I was financing their retirement while they treated me like the hired help in my own home. Madison would leave her dirty clothes in the washing machine for days until they molded, and then complain when I moved them. My dad used my car without asking, returning it with an empty tank and mysterious stains on the seats. When I tried to talk about basic house rules, they'd exchange those looks. You know, the ones that say, "Oh, poor little Laura, she's being difficult again." The breaking point had been building for months. Every time I walked into my own house, I felt like a visitor, as if my whole life, my effort, everything I had built, belonged to someone else. But that night of the ultimatum, I knew I couldn't continue this way. I got up from the table calmly, taking a deep breath, as if I were about to present a case in court. My parents gaped, unable to believe someone was finally talking back. Madison, of course, still had that silly smile, as if this were all a game. "You know what?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but not yelling. "If this is what you call family, then I choose to disappear." I'm 31 years old. I've worked since I was 16. I paid for my college, finished law school with massive debt, and built my own life while you lived in my house rent-free for 3 years. And now you're telling me I have to pay for Madison's wedding or leave forever. Well, guess what? I no longer need your permission to live my life. My dad opened his mouth, trying to say something, but no sound came out. My mom frowned, and Madison finally blinked, as if realizing her little bubble of control was starting to shatter. I recounted every detail, how I had financed their luxuries, how they had used my car and my things, how my own sister enjoyed privileges I had earned through sheer effort. I talked about the bills, the electricity I paid, the gourmet food I never asked for, every sacrifice I had made to make them comfortable. "No more," I said. "My life, my effort, my money are mine. You can keep everything you want, but I will no longer be part of this abuse. You have 24 hours to leave this house. I have been patient. I have been good. I have tried to be the perfect daughter. But that time is over." There was an absolute silence. Not a yell, not a word, just the sound of the clock ticking, the seconds as I felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. Madison stopped smiling. Perhaps for the first time, she understood that not everything in life is achieved through manipulation or by the tears of others. That night, I slept in my bed, in my room, feeling for the first time in years that I owned my own space. In the morning, when I woke up, I knew life could be different, that I could establish boundaries and defend my peace. And although I still didn't know exactly what my parents would do or how Madison would react, something inside me had changed forever. I was no longer the victim. I was no longer trapped. I no longer belonged to them. Every time I paid the bills, I saw how they had doubled while my personal savings disappeared almost without me noticing. Every time someone said, "our house," referring to my property. But I had grown up believing that family always came first, that successful people helped others, that questioning the family dynamic made you selfish. The final straw came last month when I discovered they had been telling people I was having financial problems and that they had moved in to help me. Help me? My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, told me how sweet it was that my parents were supporting me during my difficult times. I almost choked on my morning coffee. "I'm sorry, what?" I said, trying to stay calm. I sat down carefully, setting my fork on the table, all my lawyer training kicking in. Breathe. Stay calm, gather information. Don't show your cards until you're ready to play. "About the wedding," Mom said, serving herself more potatoes as if she hadn't just asked me to finance my sister's fairy tale. "We've calculated that $28,000 should cover everything. The venue, the flowers, the dress, the photographer." Madison had found the most beautiful spot in Napa Valley. Napa Valley, of course, because a local place would be too common for Princess Madison. I looked at her, examining her manicure as if her entire future happiness depended on it, while I was sitting at my kitchen table waiting for someone to explain how I had reached this point. "That's a lot of money," I said carefully. "It's an investment in the family," Dad replied, using the same tone he'd used to convince me to let them move in temporarily 3 years ago. "Madison only gets married once. We want to do it right," they said. Well, actually, this would be Madison's second engagement. The first ended because her fiancé wasn't ambitious enough. But who's counting? Certainly not my parents, who had spent my college fund on Madison's gap year in Europe while I worked 3 jobs to pay my tuition. For weeks, I'd had a feeling growing inside me. Something was fundamentally wrong with our family dynamic. It started small, noticing how conversations always revolved around Madison's needs, how my achievements were acknowledged with a brief nod before returning to her latest drama. I'd been in therapy for 6 months, finally confronting years of putting everyone else's needs before mine. "Have you considered that maybe Madison and Tyler Dixon should pay for their own wedding?" I asked gently, trying to sound reasonable. You know, like most adults do. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Mom's smile became one of those plastic grins you see on mannequins. "Laura, don't be selfish," she said. And there it was. In my own house, at my own table, I was being treated as if asking for fairness and common sense was a crime. Every word that came out of my mouth seemed to hit an invisible wall of ignorance and entitlement. And I began to realize something very important. I would never allow myself to be treated this way again. I took a breath, trying not to let the anger make me lose control. I looked my parents directly in the eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had the authority in that conversation. "Selfish?" I repeated slowly, letting the word resonate across the table. "You know what selfishness is? Spending my hard-earned money to fulfill someone else's whims while making me feel guilty for asking for what's right. That's selfishness." Dad opened his mouth but said nothing. Mom frowned, and Madison finally stopped fiddling with her nails. She realized her smile no longer held power. I felt the tension in the room growing, but instead of backing down, I stood a little firmer, as if each word were a hammer blow against the injustice I had endured for years. "Let's make something clear," I continued. My voice was calm, but with an edge they couldn't ignore. I will not pay for your wedding. I will not finance another one of your whims with money that is mine. You have lived here for 3 years and have never once considered my needs, my money, or my space. Enough is enough. My mother opened her mouth, trying to interrupt me, but I stopped her with a gesture. No, let me finish. This isn't about you or Madison. This is about me. I work, I fight, I built this house, my career, and my life, and I will no longer allow anyone to make me feel guilty for defending what is mine. There was an absolute silence. Even Madison dropped the napkin she was holding, unsure what to say. Dad leaned back in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. Mom looked at the floor with pursed lips, and I felt free, as if for the first time I was breathing without chains. And if you don't like my decision, you can pack your things and leave. You have 24 hours to do it. This is my house, my life, and my rules. No one else calls the shots here, I said with a firm voice, letting every word sink in. My sister opened her mouth, perhaps to protest, but stopped. Maybe for the first time she understood that not everything in life is achieved through manipulation, emotional blackmail, or fake tears. My parents didn't say anything either, because they knew they could no longer force me. The truth was on the table, and this time I was on the right side. That night I slept soundly, without guilt, without fear, in my bed, in my room. For the first time in years, I felt like the owner of my space, my time, and my life. And although I didn't know exactly what my parents would do or how Madison would react the next day, something inside me had changed forever. I was no longer the victim. I was no longer trapped. I no longer belonged to them. From that moment on, I knew that every decision I made would be for me and not to meet unfair expectations. Finally, freedom had a name, and that name was mine. Tyler just graduated from law school. He has student loans. They are just starting their life. Just starting, right? Tyler Dixon's parents owned half the real estate in San Francisco. But sure, let's pretend he was a poor guy struggling to survive. Meanwhile, I had been just starting for 15 years while financing my entire family's lifestyle. What if I can't pay for it? I asked, trying a different approach, trying not to explode. Then you'll manage, Dad said, cutting his steak with unnecessary force. That's what successful people do. They make things happen for the family. Successful people, I almost laughed. 3 years ago, this successful person was unemployed and about to lose his house until his daughter bailed him out. But, well, selective memory seemed very strong in my family. Madison finally looked up from her nails. It's not like you have anything else to spend your money on, she said, shrugging with that arrogant smile that had infuriated me since we were kids. You're single, you never travel, you just work all the time. At least this way, your money would go towards something meaningful. Something meaningful. 15 years working multiple jobs, 6 years building my legal career, living like a nun just to support 3 adults who treated me like an ATM, and my sister thought my life lacked meaning. My therapist, Dr. Chen, had warned me this moment would come. When you start setting boundaries, she told me, the people who have benefited from your lack of boundaries are going to push back hard. They will use guilt, manipulation, and ultimatums to restore the status quo. What if I say no? I asked, trying to stay calm. The silence that followed was almost palpable. Mom and Dad exchanged one of their patented looks, the ones that preceded every important family decision. Decisions that, for some reason, never included my opinion. Dad cleared his throat as if to deliver a verdict. Then you are not the daughter we raised, he finally said. Family always comes first, Laura. Always. If you can't understand that basic principle, then maybe you need to rethink what's truly important in your life. And if family is so important, Mom added, leaning forward with that worried expression she had perfected over the years, then you'll want to do everything you can to make Madison's day special. This is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Once in a lifetime. Yes, like my childhood, which they had spent teaching me exactly where my place was in the family hierarchy. Like my college graduation, which they missed because Madison had a tennis tournament. And there I was, sitting, taking a deep breath, feeling how all the injustice of years passed before my eyes. Every word, every gesture, every manipulation, everything screamed that my life didn't belong to them. But they expected me to continue accepting every whim as if it were natural. I took a deep breath and stood up, letting the weight of all those years of frustration and sacrifice pour out of me with every word. I looked my parents directly in the eyes, and for the first time, I felt the authority was on my side. "Once in a lifetime," I said, letting my voice remain quiet but firm. "Do you really think it's fair to ask me to pay for Madison's wedding after everything I've done for this family? After 15 years working like crazy to maintain the house, your expenses, your lifestyle, while you lived comfortably and treated me as if I were invisible?" Dad frowned, and Mom pursed her lips, trying to regain control, but I wasn't willing to back down anymore. Madison opened her mouth to say something, perhaps to remind me that I didn't understand sacrifice, but I silenced her with a look. This time, no words from her would make me feel guilty. "I will not finance your wedding," I continued. "I will not continue to be the family ATM. I will not continue to accept that my effort, my money, and my time are treated as if they were worthless. Every dollar I have earned has gone into building my life and supporting you, and that's over." There was a long, heavy silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than 1,000 words. Dad stared at the ceiling, breathing heavily, while Mom avoided my eyes. Madison, for the first time, seemed small, vulnerable, as if the bubble of her perfect world were bursting right in front of her. "If you don't understand," I said, my voice steady, trembling only slightly with emotion, "then maybe you need to learn that boundaries exist, that life doesn't revolve solely around the whims of a few, that I also have rights, dreams, and needs." Finally, I sat down again, but this time with my head held high without fear. I knew I had marked a before and after in our family. Nothing would ever be the same. They had lived comfortably at my expense for too long, and I had decided it was time for them to learn that they could no longer treat me as if everything I owned belonged to them. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a strange but liberating sensation. Fear, yes, but also power. For the first time, I understood what it truly meant to be the owner of my life. And although I didn't know exactly how my parents would react the next day, or what excuses Madison would invent, something inside me had changed forever. I was no longer the victim. I was no longer trapped. As in every birthday, every party, and every achievement I'd had in my life, everything ended up being overshadowed by some drama or celebration revolving around my sister. It was always the same. I could be fulfilling a dream, reaching a goal, and suddenly, boom, it was all about her again. That night, I had them all sitting in my own dining room, my family, the same people who had invaded my space and my peace, demanding that I pay for their dreams while treating mine as mere unimportant whims. I looked up and surveyed my house. The crystal chandelier that cost me 6 months of savings shone above their expectant faces, as if the light itself were judging them. The hardwood floors that I had sanded and varnished with my own hands gleamed beneath their shoes, those same feet that walked into my house as if it were theirs. And in the midst of that chaos, Dr. Chen's voice echoed in my head, soft but firm. "You cannot control how others react to your boundaries. You can only control whether you keep them." I took a deep breath. "I need to think about it," I finally said. Madison rolled her eyes, and her voice adopted that whiny tone that always managed to make everyone cave to her. "Think about it? What is there to think about? Either you care about the family, or you don't. Either you want me to be happy, or you're just jealous because I found someone who actually loves me." Jealous. There it was again. That word. The label they had slapped on me all my life whenever I dared to want something for myself. Jealous when Madison got the master bedroom. Jealous when she got a car for her 16th birthday and I just got a part-time job. Jealous when my parents paid for her college while I drowned in debt paying for mine. "I'm not jealous," I replied, my voice low but firm. "I'm tired. Dad crossed his arms. Tired of what? Of a family that loves you? Of people who have sacrificed so much for you? That question was like a spark igniting something that had been accumulating inside me for months. The sessions with Dr. Chen had stirred up a lot of things, and right there in front of them, everything exploded. "What have you sacrificed for me?" I asked slowly, my eyes fixed on my father's. Silence, long, uncomfortable. I could see them trying to find something to say, but there were no examples, because the truth was singular. I was the one who had sacrificed. I had sacrificed my social life to work more hours. I had sacrificed relationships because I was always stressed about money. I had sacrificed my peace of mind just to keep them comfortable, happy, and supported, as if I deserved nothing in return. "We gave you a place to live," my mom finally said, breaking the silence. "A place to live," I repeated slowly, almost laughing at the irony. "In my own house, the house I pay for." Madison scoffed. "Oh, don't be dramatic. You're acting like we're a burden." And that's when I felt it. That moment when you finally see reality without the fog, when everything clicks and you understand how far you've drifted from the shore trying to swim for others. I was in my own dining room, listening to my family justify why my money should belong to them. Dr. Chen had prepared me for this moment, but living it was another story. Knowing it in theory wasn't the same as confronting it face to face. "I'm going to need time to think," I said, and my voice sounded calm, almost strangely composed. "How much time?" Mom asked, with that sharp tone of someone afraid of losing control. "The venue needs the deposit." "I'll let you know tomorrow," I replied as I started clearing the dishes. That everyday gesture suddenly felt foreign, as if I were in someone else's house. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Madison's face with that look of superiority and heard my dad's voice repeating his ultimatum in my head. At 5 a.m, I gave up. I got up, made coffee, and watched the sunrise through the new windows, the ones I had also paid for. Everything around me, every piece of furniture, every wall, every detail, was the fruit of my effort, and yet they believed they had the right to decide how I should use it. I picked up the phone and dialed Dr. Chen's emergency number, something I had never done before. "Laura," her voice said, calm and warm. "What's going on?" I told her everything, the dinner, the ultimatum, the $28,000 they were demanding, and as I spoke, I listened to myself. My voice no longer sounded weak or fearful. It sounded clear, firm. It was the voice of a woman who finally understood that she was not obligated to continue carrying the guilt others had placed on her. The next day, I woke up early, still with my mind racing about everything that had happened. The sun streamed through the windows I had paid for and carefully chosen, and for the first time in years, I truly felt like the owner of my space. I made myself coffee, sat in the kitchen, and took a deep breath. It was time to face the storm I knew was coming. When I went down to the dining room, my parents were already there eating breakfast as if nothing had happened. Madison looked at me with that mixture of disbelief and arrogance, expecting me to yield, expecting me to return to my place. But something inside me had broken. That submissive version of Laura no longer existed. "I've thought about what you asked me," I began, my voice steady, "and the answer is no." Dad nearly spat out his coffee. "What did you say?" he asked with a frown. "I am not going to pay for Madison's wedding," I repeated calmly, without hesitation. "I will not finance something that is not mine. I will not continue to support this family with my money, while you act as if everything I own belongs to you." Mom leaned forward with that theatrical look of concern she had used for so many years. "Laura, don't you understand? This is for the family. It's a unique moment." "A unique moment for whom?" I asked sharply. "For Madison or for you? So you can continue to feel important at the expense of my life and my effort?" Madison opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her eyes reflected surprise, confusion, even fear. Dad frowned and crossed his arms. Mom looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and desperation, but I was calm. For the first time, my boundaries were clear, and I would not move an inch. If you want to live in my house, respect the rules of my house, I continued. My boundaries are non-negotiable. My money is not yours, and my time, my energy, and my peace are not either. I have spent 15 years working to support all of you, and I won't continue this way. The silence was absolute. Everyone could feel the force of my words, even if they didn't want to accept it. Madison got up furiously, as if her perfect world were crumbling. "You can't talk to me like that," she yelled. "I'm your sister." "And yes, you are my sister," I said, keeping my composure. "But that doesn't give you the right to steal my life, my money, and my peace of mind. And starting today, I will live for myself, not to maintain your whims." My parents said nothing more. Madison backed away, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of respect in her eyes mixed with fear. They knew that this time, they couldn't manipulate me. They couldn't use guilt or pressure. That morning, as I sat with my coffee watching the sun light up my house, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. A sense of power, of control over my own life. For the first time in a long time, the protagonist of this story was me, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. "How do you feel now?" Dr. Chen asked. "Angry," I replied, "but also free. I finally see the situation for what it is." "And what is it?" she insisted. "Financial abuse, emotional manipulation. A family that has never seen me as anything more than a resource to exploit." The doctor was silent for a moment. "And what do you want to do?" "I want them out of my house." "Then that is your answer." I called in sick to work and spent the morning preparing. I researched landlord-tenant laws, although they were guests, not tenants. As long-term guests, they had few protections. I called a locksmith to change the deadbolts. I even looked up moving companies because no matter what, I wanted to be ready. At 7 a.m, I knocked on Dad's door. He came out in his robe, looking annoyed. "We need to talk," I said. "About what?" he replied. "About you moving out today." His face cycled through several expressions before settling on disbelief. "You can't be serious." His voice was shaking with irritation. "You have 24 hours to find another place. Laura, you are overreacting. We are family." "Family doesn't treat people like an ATM. Mom appeared in the hallway with that dramatic look of concern she always used. "What is going on?" she asked. "I'm asking you to move out before tomorrow night." "This is about the wedding money, isn't it?" Madison interrupted from her doorway. "No, I am asking you to leave because for 3 years you have lived in my house without contributing to the expenses and have treated me as if I existed only to serve you. The demand for wedding money was just the last straw." "And where are we supposed to go?" Mom demanded. "That is no longer my problem," I replied calmly. "You are adults. Figure it out yourselves." "You can't just kick us out," Madison yelled. As an attorney, I knew exactly what rights they had as long-term guests. "Yes, I can," I said firmly, "and I am doing it." Dad took a step forward, his face serious. "If you do this, there will be no turning back. You will be choosing money over family." "No," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You chose money over family when you moved in here and decided that my income belonged to everyone. And this is crazy!" Madison screamed, verging on hysteria. "You can't destroy our family for money!" "I'm not destroying anything," I countered. "I'm protecting myself from people who, for 3 years, have taken advantage of my generosity." "Generosity?" Dad sneered. "We're your parents. We raised you, we fed you, we gave you a roof over your head for 18 years. And I repaid you by providing a roof, food, and financial support for 3 years," I reminded him. "That debt is paid." Mom tried to soften her voice, attempting to negotiate. "Honey, are you upset about the wedding? We understand. Maybe we can find a compromise." "This is not about the wedding," I said. "It is about respect. It is about boundaries. It is about basic fairness. For 3 years, I have financially supported 3 adults while being treated as if I didn't matter in my own home. That's not true, Mom protested. It is not? I countered. When was the last time either of you asked how I was? When was the last time you acknowledged that I work 60 hours a week to support all of you? When did you treat this as if it were my house and not communal property that you feel entitled to? Silence. You have 24 hours, I repeated firmly. Tomorrow night, I will change the locks, and if you haven't left, I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing. You wouldn't dare, Dad challenged. Madison started to cry, real tears this time. Laura, please, it's me. But I didn't feel guilt. I only felt the clarity I had never had. Finally, my house, my life, and my money were under my control. For the first time, I felt like the owner of myself. That morning was intense. I watched them move around the house, confused, making excuses, looking around as if everything they had taken for granted was collapsing. Madison kept sobbing, covering her face with her hands while Mom paced back and forth, murmuring something about how I could be so cruel. Dad remained seated with his arms crossed, as if the world had turned its back on him. Now what do we do? Mom whispered, almost to herself. Now, I said firmly. You learn to stand on your own 2 feet. 3 years was long enough. As they awkwardly packed their things, trying to make the scene look normal, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Every suitcase they carried, every picture they took down, every empty drawer they left behind was a reminder that my house was finally becoming mine alone. Madison shot me one last look, a mix of rage and defeat. You don't do this, she tried to say, but her voice broke. Yes, you do, I calmly replied. This is called justice, boundaries, and respect. Dad finally stood up and let out a heavy, resigned sigh. Mom buried her head in her hands. I had never felt so empowered. What once seemed impossible was now real. I was protecting my life. When the last suitcase went out the door, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Silence filled the house, a warm silence full of freedom and possibilities. For the first time in a long time, I could walk through my dining room without feeling invaded, without feeling fear or guilt. Everything was mine, built with my effort, my hands, my life. That afternoon, I sat on the sofa with a cup of coffee and smiled. It wasn't a smile of superficial joy, but of deep peace. I knew the process wasn't over, that there would be difficult days, mixed emotions, and memories that might come back to haunt me. But I also knew there was no going back. I had set clear boundaries, defended my space, and chosen myself for the first time in years. As I looked at my house, every detail came alive. The gleaming hardwood floors under the light, the furniture I had chosen with such care, the windows letting in the sun and illuminating my world. Everything was a reminder that my effort and my sacrifice had been worth it. And this time, no one could snatch away what was mine. That night, I finally slept soundly. There was no fear, no guilt, no unfair demands, just peace. For the first time, I could dream without feeling like I was betraying someone, because I finally understood that defending myself wasn't betraying anyone. It was reclaiming my life, my worth, and my happiness. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that nothing would ever be the same, that the life I deserved had finally begun. I'm getting married, Madison said, slightly trembling. This is supposed to be the happiest time of my life. For a moment, I felt the old tug of guilt that always accompanied me, the urge to console her, to fix her problems, to be the good sister who puts everyone else first. But then I remembered Dr. Chen's words. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Madison, I said calmly, you can have a happy wedding. It just won't be funded by my savings. But Tyler Dixon expects a nice ceremony. His family has money. They'll judge us if we can't afford something decent, she complained. There it was, the real problem. Madison was embarrassed by her financial situation and expected me to solve it. Then maybe Tyler's family should pay, I proposed firmly. No, they shouldn't. And I should? Madison said, finding no argument. I spent the rest of the day watching them spiral. Calls to relatives, frantic internet searches for apartments, heated arguments over whose fault it was. No one seemed to consider that perhaps they themselves had brought this upon themselves. Around dinner time, Tyler Dixon arrived. I watched him from the window as Madison dramatically burst into tears in his arms. They stayed on the porch for 20 minutes talking before he left, confused and frustrated. Madison came back inside with red eyes but renewed determination. Tyler says we can postpone the wedding a few months, she announced. He'll talk to his parents about helping with the expenses. Good for you, I replied. Problem solved. No, the problem isn't solved. You're still kicking us out of the house. Her voice rose. Yes, I am. But why? She asked, still incredulous. We found another solution for the wedding. I looked at her, astonished that she still didn't understand. Madison, this was never just about the wedding. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of family drama, calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all wanting to know why I was abandoning my family. Aunt Patricia called 3 times. Uncle Robert sent me a long text about family values. Even my grandmother, whom I love deeply, called to ask if I had lost my mind. They're saying you threw them out because of a wedding, she said softly. That's not exactly how it was, Grandma. Then how was it? I explained the whole situation, the 3 years of rent-free living, the increasing expenses, the complete lack of contribution, the final demand for wedding money. Oh, honey, she whispered. I had no idea. Most people aren't very good at controlling the narrative. What they're asking is not reasonable. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. Those words meant more than I could have imagined. My grandmother, the family matriarch, saw the situation clearly, but my parents and Madison weren't giving up. Dad tried to reason, talking about how difficult it was to find employment at his age. Mom resorted to guilt, mentioning how disappointed my late grandfather would be. Madison alternated between anger and tears, sometimes in the same conversation. And now where are we supposed to go? Mom asked for the 10th time. There are apartments, extended stay hotels, other relatives, I replied. Figure it out yourselves. With what money? Dad said. Dad, you can get a job. Madison, you can too. Revolutionary concept, right? I know you're being cruel, Madison said. No, I'm being practical, I countered. You are capable adults who chose not to work because I made it easy to stay here. At 6 p.m. on Tuesday, exactly 24 hours after my ultimatum, they were still there. I came home from work and found them in the living room with their packed bags, looking like refugees. We need more time, Dad said. You've had 3 years, I replied firmly. Just 1 more week. We have some apartment contacts, Madison tried. No, I cut her off. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. What are you doing? Mom gasped. Calling the police to remove intruders from my property. You wouldn't, Madison said. Watch me, I replied. Before I could finish, Dad held up his hands. Okay, we'll go, he said. It finally took them another 2 hours to pack everything. I watched them from the kitchen, sipping tea and feeling strangely calm. This should have been traumatic, but instead, it felt like watching an enormous weight being lifted from me. Mom was the last to leave. She paused at the door, tears in her eyes. I hope you'll be happy, she said. I will be, I replied. After they left, I walked through my house alone for the first time in 3 years. The silence was beautiful. My space, my rules, my peace. I made dinner just for myself and ate it at my own kitchen table without anyone protesting my choices. I watched whatever I wanted on television without negotiating. For the first time, everything was completely mine. With the house finally empty, for the first time in years, I could breathe without feeling watched, judged, or used. I walked through every room, touching the walls, inspecting the floors, feeling that all the effort I had put in for years finally made sense. Every detail, every object, every memory was there because I had chosen it, not to please anyone else. I decided to sit in my living room with a notebook and a pen. I started writing down goals, dreams, plans that had been forgotten while I spent my life covering the whims and needs of others. For the first time, I felt like I could build my life the way I wanted. There were no ultimatums, no demands, no manipulations, just peace and infinite possibilities. That night, I prepared a quiet dinner for myself, lit candles, put on soft music, and breathed deeply. For the first time, the house felt like a sanctuary instead of a prison. I knew things wouldn't magically be perfect overnight, but the freedom I felt was more valuable than any comfort they had provided at the cost of my life. In the following days, I focused on myself. I resumed legal projects I had put aside. I reserved time for myself, my health, and my true dreams. Every day, I felt stronger, more secure, and clearer about what I deserved. No one could steal my energy or my money again, and that gave me a confidence I had never felt. I even started thinking about vacations, trips I had postponed for years, investments that would allow me to grow and secure my independence. Every decision I made no longer needed anyone's approval. For the first time, everything I did was just for me. The feeling of empowerment was incredible. There was no need for guilt, manipulation, or forced conformity. I knew that the family that truly mattered was no longer the one that had abused me, but the people who respected and valued me. And in that moment, I understood that protecting my life, my well-being, and my boundaries was not selfishness but self-love. I walked through the garden I had tended for years and felt the fresh air fill me with energy. I knew I had gone through an enormous emotional storm. But I also knew I had emerged stronger, more conscious, and freer than ever. For the first time in years, I sat in my favorite armchair, took a sip of tea, and smiled. Everything was mine, my space, my time, my tranquility, and my life. And as the sun set, I knew with absolute certainty that I had reclaimed the most important things, my freedom and my peace, and no one, ever again, could take them away from me. I laughed bitterly when Sarah told me that. "Well, you see," I replied, "it seems I am now the official family villain." "Don't take it personally," she said. "People like that need to invent stories so they don't have to accept responsibility." After hanging up, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about how quickly a lie can become the truth when repeated enough times. In a matter of days, the rumor had a life of its own, that I had thrown them out onto the street, that I had become cold, that money had changed me. No one mentioned the years of sacrifices, the sleepless nights worrying about payments, or the days when I myself went without so they could be comfortable. Sometimes I thought about calling Madison and explaining one more time how things had gotten out of control. But then I remembered her crocodile tears, her emotional blackmail, and I knew it wasn't worth it. You can't reason with someone who only hears what suits them. One afternoon, while walking in the park with a coffee, I ran into an old college friend, Clara. She told me she had seen my parents staying at a cousin's house and that, according to them, they were trying to recover after the emotional blow I had dealt them. "The emotional blow you dealt them?" Clara said, raising an eyebrow. "I didn't know demanding respect and boundaries was violence." "It seems it is in my family," I replied with a weary smile. The days kept passing. My house remained clean, quiet, and peaceful. I cooked whatever I felt like, watched the shows I wanted, and at night I could sleep without feeling the weight of 3 people breathing my air and draining my energy. But even so, there were moments of silence where a mixture of sadness and relief washed over me. Sadness for the family I wished I had and never did. Relief for having had the courage to end a cycle that was slowly killing me. One Sunday morning, I decided to visit my grandmother. She was the only one who had told me she was proud of me, and I needed to see her. When I arrived, she greeted me with her usual warm smile and served me coffee with sweet bread. "My dear, I've heard many things," she said in a low voice, "but I know who you are, and I know how much you gave before reaching this point." "Sometimes I feel guilty," I confessed, "like I failed for not putting up with it anymore." "No, honey," she replied firmly. "One does not fail for getting tired of being used. The one who abuses the love of others fails." Her words touched my soul. For the first time, I felt that someone understood without needing a full explanation. I spent the afternoon there, listening to her stories, remembering that not all my family was toxic, that there was still sincere love in some corner of that family tree. That night, returning home, I sat in front of the window with a glass of wine and watched the city lights. Everything felt different. Not perfect, but real. I knew my parents would continue to speak ill of me, that Madison would find new ways to present herself as a victim, and that many would continue to believe their version. But inside, something had changed. I no longer needed them to believe me. I no longer sought to justify myself. I had discovered something much more valuable than their approval, my emotional freedom. And that, I understood, was something no rumor could take away from me. In the end, I didn't care if the world saw me as the villain of the story, because the truth was simple. For the first time in my life, I was the protagonist of my own piece. The following weeks were a discovery. Without the constant pressure to please everyone, I was able to reconnect with myself. For the first time in years, my time was mine. I ate breakfast peacefully. I walked through the neighborhood unhurriedly, and I could focus on my legal projects without anyone interrupting me with complaints or demands. I started investing in myself. I signed up for photography classes, something I had put aside since college. I spent entire afternoons walking with my camera, capturing the light of the sunset, the trees, the life I had ignored while my parents and Madison occupied my mind and my resources. Each photo was a reminder that now I decided what deserved my attention and effort. I also rekindled neglected friendships. I met up with Sarah and Clara several times a week, sharing laughs and confidences, and for the first time, I felt that family could be chosen, not imposed. These people supported me, listened to me, and celebrated my achievements without asking for anything in return. It was a healthy kind of love I had never experienced at home. At work, my energy completely changed. I felt more secure, more focused. Clients noticed my renewed enthusiasm, and my colleagues complimented me on the clarity with which I made decisions. Jennifer told me, "Laura, you seem like a different person." And she was right. My internal peace was reflected in every aspect of my professional and personal life. One afternoon, while organizing my desk, I realized that I had eliminated the pending accounts I had put off due to family demands. Now I could save, plan trips, and afford small luxuries that once seemed impossible. I even thought about moving to a larger apartment or redecorating the house to reflect solely my style and my dreams. I also came to an important conclusion. Boundaries were not punishments. They were a way to protect myself. And by protecting myself, I could finally enjoy my relationships, my work, and my life without feeling guilt or fear. Every day was an affirmation that I had done the right thing. At night, I sometimes sat on my living room sofa with the window open and the breeze coming in, and I thought about everything I had endured. The tears were not of sadness, but of liberation. I knew I had survived years of manipulation, and that now I was in control. And then something unexpected happened. I received a call from Tyler Dixon. This time his tone was different, respectful, and without fear. "Laura," he said, "I wanted to apologize for not realizing it sooner. Madison told me her version, but I wanted to hear yours." I told him the story from my perspective, patiently and clearly. In the end, Tyler simply said, "Thank you for trusting me. I'm glad you set your boundaries." For the first time, I felt I could have healthy relationships with people who respected my decisions and understood my worth. The following days were about rebuilding. I painted some walls, bought new furniture, and little by little, my house became a reflection of my independence and strength. There were no yells, no tears, no demands, just peace, laughter, and the sound of the life I had chosen. Finally, I understood something crucial. My happiness didn't depend on anyone else. My well-being was non-negotiable, and the freedom I had conquered was, without a doubt, my greatest triumph. For the first time, looking at my home illuminated by the afternoon light, I genuinely smiled. Not for the achievements others recognized, but because I had finally recovered my life, my boundaries, and my peace. And that, I knew, was the greatest victory anyone could have. "I'm sorry?" I asked, arching an eyebrow. "Yes, I want to apologize," she insisted, with that calculating smile I had learned to read since childhood, for all the money stuff, the house, everything that happened. I sighed. I knew this wouldn't be simple. Madison always had a way of trying to smooth things over to get what she wanted. I got up and walked toward the window, letting the silence do part of the work for me. I looked at the city from my office, took a deep breath, and finally said, "Okay, let's talk. But I want you to first listen to everything you never wanted to understand." Madison frowned slightly, surprised by my firmness. "For 3 years, I've paid for everything. You haven't worked more than 6 months straight. Your expenses, my parents' expenses, the rent you never paid, the food, the clothes, the trips, everything. And you still asked me to finance your wedding as if my life were worthless." Her eyes widened a little, but her face didn't completely change, as if she were still looking for a way to manipulate me. "But I just wanted everything to be perfect," she said, trying to soften the situation. "I thought you would support me." "It's not about support," I cut her off, calm but firm. "It's about respect and boundaries. I am not an ATM or your servant. No more emotional manipulation, no more ultimatums." She remained silent, and for a moment I saw a spark of comprehension, although mixed with surprise and frustration. That spark made me feel powerful. I was finally putting words to years of abuse without feeling guilt. "Laura," she began, lowering her gaze, I never imagined you would feel that way." "That I would feel exploited?" I asked. "That I would feel tired of prioritizing your happiness over mine? Yes, Madison, that's how I felt, and I will never ignore it again." Her face slowly changed. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of sincerity mixed with fear. Her world, built on the idea that I would always solve everything for her, was beginning to shake. "So you're not going to help me with the wedding?" she finally asked, almost in a whisper, with a hint of defeat. "No," I replied firmly and calmly. "If you want your wedding to be your responsibility, then you will have to find a way to pay for it yourself. And Tyler needs to know that too. I will not cover what is not mine." She rose slowly from her chair, as if each step were a reminder that her privileges were crumbling. She looked at me for a moment, something between resentment and acknowledgement, and then turned to leave. "And thank you for listening to me," I said, before she left the office. "I guess it's the right thing," she replied without looking at me, and walked out. When the door closed, I was left alone. I took a deep breath, feeling an enormous burden lift from my shoulders. It wasn't just the money. It was years of control, manipulation, and demands. For the first time, I felt I could truly breathe. That night, I sat at my desk, writing in my journal. Every word was a reminder that I would no longer allow myself to be used or manipulated, that my time, my money, and my peace were mine, and no one had the right to claim them. And as I wrote, a genuine smile appeared on my face. Finally, after years of sacrifice, Laura was free. The next day, I felt a relief I had never known. For the first time in years, I could organize my day without worrying about my family's demands or shouts. I drank my coffee peacefully in the kitchen while the sun streamed through the windows I had paid for and carefully chosen. I took a deep breath and thought, "This is mine and no one else's." I decided to do something I had put off for years, plan a small trip for myself. I didn't need luxuries or approval. I just needed to feel the freedom that had cost me so much to achieve. I looked for a destination near the beach, a place where I could walk barefoot, listen to the sea, and feel that the world owed me nothing except respect and peace. As I checked my options, my phone rang. It was Tyler Dixon. "Laura," he said in a more relaxed tone, "I wanted to say thank you. Not just for what you did with your family, but for opening my eyes. I've been giving in too much to Madison, and I think I finally understand what's important." "I'm glad," I replied. "Now you know that love doesn't mean sacrificing your life for someone who doesn't respect your boundaries." After that conversation, Tyler also began to change. He started setting boundaries with Madison, teaching her that adult life isn't a game where the loudest person always wins. I felt silent satisfaction. My decision not only helped me, but was positively affecting someone else. Over time, I realized that I needed to rebuild not only my emotional life, but also my environment. I painted the walls of my living room with colors that made me happy. I changed furniture, added plants and photos that reflected who I was now, an independent, strong, and free woman. Every object in the house told a story of autonomy and choice. I returned to my legal practice with renewed enthusiasm. Clients noticed my energy and confidence. I felt more efficient and clearer than ever. I even started receiving recognition for my work, and every compliment reminded me that I had achieved everything by myself, without depending on the approval of those who had once abused my generosity. One day, while walking through the city with my camera, I came across a local art exhibition. I stopped to look at the paintings and felt a thrill of emotion. Vivid colors, sure strokes, stories told without fear. I thought about myself and everything I had endured, and I smiled. Now I, too, could paint my own life without anyone dictating the colors or the shadows. I even started seeing my grandmother again, who became my refuge and counselor. Her constant words of support helped me understand that although part of my family still lived in a false narrative, I had the ability to create a new story, a story of respect, boundaries, and self-love. With each passing day, I felt more peace. I learned to say no without guilt, to prioritize my needs, to enjoy the silence of my house and my free time. My life had stopped revolving around manipulation and ultimatums and began to revolve around my dreams, my choices, and my happiness. And so, little by little, Laura found something more valuable than any inheritance or money: her freedom, her space, and the power to decide her own destiny. For the first time in a long time, looking out the window as the sun set, I smiled without regret, with the certainty that nothing and no one could steal what I had finally conquered: my life, my rules, and my absolute peace. "This was unexpected," I said, trying to remain calm as I processed what I had just heard. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I realized that perhaps you took advantage of my generosity." "And perhaps," Madison said carefully, as if measuring every word, "I want to fix things between us. Family is too important to lose over money." "And what exactly do you propose?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Tyler and I are going to pay you back," she said. "Not all at once, obviously, but we can make a payment plan. Plus, we'll pay for our own wedding. Something small, reasonable." It sounded too good to be true, so I automatically assumed there was a catch. "What's the catch, Madison?" I asked, observing her movements. Her expression tightened slightly. "There's no catch," she replied. "I just want my sister back." "Then why do you look like you're about to ask me for something?" I asked, suspecting the worst. She nervously fumbled with her purse strap, a gesture I had learned to recognize years ago. "Well, the thing is, Tyler's apartment is too small for 4 people, and his lease has restrictions on permanent guests, so we were hoping—" "There it was," I said, guessing the word she wouldn't say. "You want to move back in?" "Only temporarily," she replied quickly. "Until we find a permanent place, and this time we would pay rent. I promise." I leaned back in my chair, evaluating every detail of her face. She seemed sincere, but Madison had always been an expert at seeming sincere when she wanted something. "How much rent?" I asked. "Like $800 a month," she said. My mortgage alone was $2,800, not counting utilities, taxes, insurance, and maintenance. $800 didn't even cover a quarter of the actual costs, but it was an improvement over the $500 they had offered before. And how long would temporary be this time? I asked. 6 months, max, she said, just until we get married and find our own place. And the wedding? I inquired. We're looking at smaller venues, maybe something around $15,000, she replied. 15,000, I mused. Still a lot of money for someone with no income, but at least it was better than 28,000. Madison, why should I trust you this time? I asked seriously. Because I learned my lesson, she said, shifting uncomfortably. I know I was wrong before. What lesson did you learn exactly? I asked, raising an eyebrow. She moved uncomfortably, looking away. That family relationships are more important than money, she replied softly. That was the wrong answer. The real lesson would have been, adults need to support themselves and contribute fairly to shared expenses. But Madison still saw this as money versus family, instead of respect and boundaries. I appreciate the apology, I said carefully, but I'm not ready to change my mind about the housing situation. Her mask of composure cracked a little more. Laura, please. Tyler Dixon is going to kick us out too. We have nowhere to go. And your parents? I asked. They found an apartment. They're in a studio, she replied. There's barely space for them, let alone Madison and me. There I understood. My parents had found a place of their own, probably something economical and adequate for them. Good for them. Madison, you're 28 years old and have a college degree. You can find a job, earn money, and rent your own apartment like any adult in this country. But the job market is terrible, and most places ask for experience that I don't have because I've been out of work helping the family, she said. There was the phrase, helping the family. 3 years of unemployment transformed into family service. You've been out of work because you chose not to work, I countered. That's not fair. Someone had to take care of Mom and Dad, she said, in desperate defense. What care did they need? I asked firmly. Dad isn't disabled, and Mom is perfectly capable. Madison opened and closed her mouth, unable to find a convincing answer. The truth was simple. What my parents needed was financial support, which I had given them while Madison enjoyed the benefits without contributing. Look, she said, changing tactics, Tyler is starting to ask questions about money and responsibilities. If I don't sort this out soon, he might call off the engagement. There it was. The apology wasn't because she had learned anything. It was out of fear. Her safety net was disappearing and Madison was starting to feel the pressure. Maybe that would be best for both of you, I said calmly. Her eyes widened abruptly. How can you say that? I love Tyler, she exclaimed. Do you really love him? I asked. Or do you just love the idea of being married and having someone else solve your financial problems? That is a horrible thing to say, she replied, her voice trembling. Madison, what do you bring to this relationship besides expecting Tyler to pay for everything? I said, leaving the question hanging in the air. I could see her searching for an answer, but nothing came. Finally, in a small voice, she said, I bring love. And for the first time, I knew she was facing reality. Love does not cover irresponsibility or disrespect. Love, I said, crossing my arms. Love doesn't pay bills, Madison. It doesn't buy respect or return the time others sacrificed for you. She fell silent, swallowing her words. Her eyes, which had previously shone with confidence and arrogance, were now damp and full of doubt. I could tell she was starting to grasp, even if only slightly, that life wasn't about having someone else solve all your problems. Okay, she finally said in a low voice. Maybe I was wrong. Not maybe, Madison. You were wrong for 3 years. You lived without responsibility, using my money, my house, my patience, and now you want to come back as if nothing happened. My voice remained firm, calm, but full of authority. She lowered her gaze, nervously playing with her hands. I could see she was considering every word, every consequence of her actions. "Look," I continued, "if you want to come back, it will be under clear conditions. No free living, no expectations about my money, no emotional manipulation. Every expense has to be fair, and every behavior has to show respect." Madison raised her head and looked at me, surprised and a little scared. "Does that mean I can stay?" she asked cautiously. "It means that if you decide to stay, you will do so as a responsible adult," I said. "Prompt rent, participation in utilities, respect for my space and my boundaries. And the wedding, you and Tyler pay for your own celebration. I will not put in another dime." "Okay," she whispered, almost breathless. "I can do that." "Can you really?" I asked firmly. "Because this time there will be no second chances, no more excuses, no more whining, no more manipulation. Every action will have consequences." She nodded slowly, breathing deeply. For the first time, I could see a spark of responsibility, an acknowledgement of what she had done and what she needed to change. Then I said, softening my voice slightly, "We can try again, but remember, this is not just about money or weddings. It's about respect, boundaries, and trust. All of that is rebuilt step by step." Madison closed her eyes and sighed, and for a moment it seemed to me that she had understood the seriousness of her mistakes. "Thank you, Laura," she said with a trembling voice. "I won't forget it." "You better not," I replied, "because I won't forget what happened either, and I won't allow it to happen again." We spent the rest of the day planning the details of the new agreement. Madison committed to looking for a job and saving for the wedding. Tyler Dixon agreed to talk to her about financial responsibility. I documented everything, from payments to house rules. Finally, there was a real, clear, and fair plan. When she left my office that afternoon, I noticed a change. The arrogance had given way to humility, albeit still fragile. It wasn't perfect, and I didn't expect it to be, but it was a first step. For the first time in years, I felt that the scales of justice in my home were beginning to tip in the right direction. That night, as I closed my office door and looked at my reflection in the window, I smiled slightly. I had survived the biggest family storm of my life. I had set boundaries, protected my space, and taught Madison a lesson that might take her a while to learn, but that she finally needed to face. And most importantly, for the first time, I felt that my life was mine again. Love is not enough for a marriage. You need partnership, shared responsibility, mutual respect. What you are offering Tyler is exactly what you offered me. The privilege of financing your life while I received guilt and manipulation in return. Madison shot up abruptly, finally losing the little composure she had left. "You've become cold, Laura. Success has made you cold." "No," I replied in a low voice. "Setting boundaries has made me healthier." She left my office crying, and I felt that old knot of guilt in my stomach. But this time I recognized it for what it truly was: programming, years of conditioning that had made me feel responsible for the emotions of others, even when those emotions were a consequence of their own decisions. That same night, I called Dr. Chen. "How do you feel after the conversation?" she asked. "Guilty, but also clear," I said. I could see exactly what she was trying to do, and I didn't fall for her game. "That is growth," she replied. "Growth rarely feels good. You are changing patterns that have existed your whole life. That takes hard work." She looked so lost when she left. "Madison is lost, but Laura, you are not responsible for finding her. She has to do that work for herself." She was right, but it still hurt to see my sister struggling. The difference now was that I understood the line between helping and enabling. In the following weeks, I heard updates through family gossip. Madison and Tyler Dixon had broken up. She had moved in with a friend. My parents were surviving in their small studio. Dad was working part-time at a hardware store, Mom doing computer work from home. The family narrative had changed again. Now I was the successful sister who had abandoned her family in their time of greatest need, the sister who had chosen money over love, career over family, selfishness over sacrifice. A year ago, I might have believed that version, but therapy gave me the tools to recognize manipulation. My family's story required me to believe that wanting basic respect in my own home was selfishness, that expecting adults to support themselves was cruel, that refusing to finance the dreams of others was abandonment. I no longer believed any of it. But the true test of my determination came 6 months later at 2 a.m. when Madison called me crying. "Laura, I need help." I sat up abruptly, instantly alert. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "I'm pregnant," she said between sobs. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Madison, unemployed and single, was going to have a baby. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I took 3 tests. I went to the clinic. I'm sure. Who was the father? A guy I met at a bar? I don't even have his real number." My heart broke for her. This was exactly the type of crisis my family specialized in, the kind that required immediate rescue from someone else. "What do you need?" I asked, knowing the answer beforehand. "I can't afford a baby, Laura. I can barely afford food. I need money for the doctor. I need a place to live with a baby. I just need help." There it was, the emergency that would justify everything, the crisis that would make me the villain if I didn't rush to the rescue. And for the first time, I took a deep breath and remembered what I had learned. Helping does not mean sacrificing yourself until you disappear. This time, I couldn't be part of the rescue pattern that kept my family dependent on me. It wasn't selfishness. It was survival and teaching boundaries, even if it hurt. I took a deep breath and said calmly, "Madison, I'm going to help you. Yes, but not like before. I will not take over your life or your problems. This time there are clear conditions." "Conditions?" she sobbed. "But it's a baby. I can't do this alone." "Exactly," I agreed. "It's a baby, and that means responsibility. I can no longer carry everything as if nothing is wrong. You have to make decisions, find work, plan your expenses, and find a place to live. I can support you with the basics, medical costs and some initial needs, but the rest is up to you." She looked at me with wide eyes, full of fear, as if her world were crashing down. And it was. But I also knew something she didn't yet. Real life does not forgive a lack of preparation and boundaries. "And Tyler?" I asked. "Does he plan to take any responsibility?" "No," she said with a trembling voice. He doesn't know what to do." I sighed. Of course. It had always been me who solved everything, even the problems of other adults. But not this time. This time, I was going to set the rules and stick to them. "Okay," I said. "I will help you with the urgent things. Medical appointments, initial diapers, some food for the first month. But you will look for a job and your own place to live. No staying at my house. No expecting me to pay for your complete life. Understood?" Madison nodded slowly, still crying, but this time with a glimmer of understanding. I could see that she was starting to grasp that the world didn't owe her anything, and that dependence was not love or protection or family. It was a pattern she had learned to exploit. "Laura," she said through tears, "can you really do this without feeling guilty?" "Yes," I replied firmly, "because this time I am not acting out of guilt or fear that you will hate me. I am acting out of respect for myself and to teach you to live responsibly." Weeks passed, and Madison began looking for work and planning her life. It wasn't easy. Job calls were frustrating, and initial attempts didn't seem to work. But for the first time, she had to solve things for herself, and I was only there as support, not as a savior. Tyler Dixon also began to see reality. He understood that love doesn't replace responsibility and that a marriage cannot be sustained by only dreams and external expectations. Little by little, he took charge of certain expenses, and Madison began to understand that expecting others to pay for your life is neither love nor success. Meanwhile, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace and clarity. I could sleep peacefully, work peacefully, enjoy my house and my achievements. No yelling, no manipulation, no guilt disguised as family. It was the first time I could see my own life with clear boundaries and without fear. And although Madison still had much to learn about independence and responsibility, for the first time, I saw the potential for her to grow. I couldn't save her from everything, but I could let her learn to get up on her own. And that was enough, because after all, loving is not doing everything for the other person. Loving is teaching, supporting, and allowing space for everyone to learn to live their own life. My sister, pregnant, alone, desperate, needed me, her successful sister, to come to her rescue. A year ago, I would have run to open the door immediately. I would have paid for everything, accompanied her pregnancy, and ensured she lacked nothing. I would have convinced myself that that was what family did. Madison, I'm sorry you're going through this, I said with a firm but calm voice. Do you want me to help you? The question hung between us like a bridge I could cross or burn. I knew that this time I couldn't fall back into old patterns. I can help you research resources, I continued. Medicaid for prenatal care, WIC for nutritional assistance, housing programs for single mothers. There are support systems available. That's not what I mean, she sobbed, and I knew it. I know, I said, but Madison, you have options. There are places to turn, help available, programs that can support you. You don't have to do it alone, but I cannot be your sole support. The silence on the other end was devastating. So this is it, she whispered. Your own sister is pregnant and scared, and you're going to abandon me? I am not abandoning you, Madison, I said firmly. I am refusing to enable you. There is a difference between helping and rescuing. She hung up without saying more. I didn't sleep that night. I lay staring at the ceiling, questioning everything. Was I insensitive? Was I abandoning my sister in her most vulnerable moment? I had focused so much on boundaries that I had lost compassion. Upon reflection, I found the answer. Compassion does not demand sacrificing my financial security or my emotional well-being. Helping does not mean taking on all the responsibility for another person's life. I called Dr. Chen for an emergency session. Are you doubting yourself? She observed after I told her about Madison's call. Shouldn't I be? I asked. She's pregnant and alone. Yes, she is alone, and she has decisions to make about her future. You can support her without rescuing her from her responsibilities. But what if something goes wrong? I said, worried. What if she can't handle it? Laura, what if she can? She replied calmly. What if being forced to manage her own crisis is exactly what Madison needs to truly mature? It was a difficult truth, but Dr. Chen was right. Every time I had rescued Madison from the consequences of her actions, I had prevented her from learning to face difficult situations. I had kept her dependent instead of helping her become independent. That same afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I researched all the resources available for pregnant women in Madison's situation: medical insurance programs, food assistance, housing aid, job training, parenting classes. I compiled everything into a detailed document and emailed it to her with a message. I believe in your ability to handle this. Here are tools to help you succeed. She didn't reply. In the following months, I learned how she was progressing through family channels. Madison had applied for Medicaid and WIC. She had moved into a temporary housing program for pregnant women. She even got a part-time job at a child care center where she could take the baby. She was managing, not perfectly, not without difficulty, but she was doing it. My parents, meanwhile, were also adjusting to their new reality. Dad's part-time job became full-time when his boss recognized his experience. Mom discovered she enjoyed data entry and even considered going back to school for computer training. They, too, were managing their lives. The family gatherings I heard about through my grandmother were smaller, quieter, with less drama, fewer financial crises, and more conversations about people's real lives instead of their emergencies. I wasn't invited to those gatherings, and that hurt, but they also didn't ask me to finance them, organize them, or fix problems that weren't mine. I was learning to live with the pain without losing my peace, finally appreciating the space I had gained for my own life. For the first time, I understood that setting boundaries does not take away love or compassion. It simply protects your life while giving others tools to learn to fend for themselves. And that, more than any money or sacrifice, was true freedom. The following months were a real change. Madison was learning to manage her life step by step. Not everything was perfect. Sometimes she was late with her housing program payments. She felt overwhelmed with her part-time job and prenatal studies, but she faced every obstacle by herself. I wasn't there to solve it, and for the first time, she was beginning to take real responsibility. I received updates indirectly through messages from her friend, through news that reached me via my grandmother, or through quick calls from Tyler Dixon. Each report was a reminder that my decision had been the right one, even though it still hurt to see her struggle. "Laura," Tyler said to me one day, "she's learning to handle things for real, not like before when everything depended on you." I smiled, but with sadness. Yes, she was doing it. Madison was growing through hard reality checks, learning what I had learned years earlier. Meanwhile, my parents were also changing. Dad no longer complained about every detail, and Mom even found satisfaction in her office tasks. It wasn't the perfect life, but everyone was finding their place without me having to sacrifice myself for them. One day, I received a message from Madison. "Laura, thank you for the information you gave me. I'm starting to understand how to handle this. I know I couldn't keep depending on you." It wasn't an apology or an attempt to manipulate me. It was a sign that she was taking the reins of her life. For the first time, I felt proud of her for what she was doing and not for how I could fix it. Meanwhile, I rebuilt my daily routine. My job was still demanding, but now my time and energy were solely mine. I could sleep, eat peacefully, organize my house, and dedicate myself to my well-being without feeling guilty. I even started doing things I had neglected for years. Yoga classes, a photography course, spending time with friends who didn't have problematic family agendas. Every small action reinforced that setting boundaries was not selfishness, but survival and self-care. 6 months passed. Madison gave birth to a healthy baby. It wasn't easy. There were sleepless nights, moments of panic, and tears, but she achieved it without me having to rescue her. Tyler Dixon also began to understand the family dynamic, and although there was still tension, he learned not to be part of my family's demands. My parents, seeing how their daughters managed life independently, began to respect the boundaries I had imposed. They stopped calling me daily to demand money. They stopped trying to manipulate with guilt. They had learned that I was no longer their constant savior, and although it was difficult for them, they began to accept that life could continue without me financing every crisis. My grandmother, as always, reminded me of something fundamental. "Honey, you did well. You helped when necessary, but you also taught responsibility. That is true love." And she was right. My love for my family didn't mean destroying my life or allowing them to take advantage of me. Madison was learning to live, to face reality, and to be a mother without completely depending on me. My parents were finding their place without dragging me down with them, and I was finally at peace. I learned that setting boundaries does not diminish love. It just makes it healthier, that sometimes the best way to help someone is not to solve their life for them, but to give them the tools to solve it for themselves, that respect and responsibility are the foundation of any lasting relationship, and that my peace of mind is priceless. That was the real lesson that took me years to learn. Love doesn't always mean extreme sacrifice. Sometimes it means letting go, observing, and allowing others to grow on their own, while you finally breathe, live, and build your own happiness. A year after my ultimatum, I met Tyler Dixon at a downtown coffee shop. He was not the Tyler I had known during the last years of family chaos. He looked relaxed, calm, almost relieved, as if for the first time he was breathing without the weight of Madison's expectations. "Laura," he said, approaching my table with some shyness, "how are you?" "Good," I replied, smiling slightly. "You look great," he told me, and something in his voice conveyed sincerity, not the nervous tone he used when discussing his relationship with Madison. "And thank you, I feel great," I replied, surprised by how much that reflected my life at the moment. I wanted to thank you for, he said, and raised an eyebrow as if searching for the right words. For what? I asked, curious. For the conversation we had about boundaries. It changed my life, he explained. I realized I was about to marry someone who expected me to solve all her problems while she contributed nothing to any solution. That's not a real partnership, Laura. It's not a society. It's not mutual respect. He said this with a clarity that made me smile with satisfaction. Are you seeing anyone now? I asked with genuine interest. Yes, actually I am, he replied. Someone who works just as hard as I do, who pays her own bills, who treats me like a partner, not a bank account. I smiled, genuinely happy for him. It was good to see that Tyler had also learned the lesson of how relationships should function. That sounds wonderful, I said. By the way, Madison's baby is beautiful. She posts photos sometimes. My heart sank a little. I hadn't seen photos of my nephew or niece. I didn't even know if it was a boy or a girl. But the casual way Tyler mentioned it indicated that Madison was well enough to maintain her life and her social media presence. Is she okay? I asked, worried despite everything. As far as I can tell, yes, he said. She's learning to manage everything. The baby seems healthy and happy. When Tyler left, I stayed seated in the coffee shop for a long time, thinking about decisions and consequences. My decision to set boundaries had come with a price. Broken relationships, family gatherings I wasn't a part of, a niece or nephew I might never fully know. But it also brought consequences for which I was deeply grateful. Financial security like I'd never had before, peace in my own home, relationships based on mutual respect instead of economic dependence, and a sense of self-worth that didn't depend on how useful I was to others. I drove back to my house peacefully. I made dinner for one person and settled in to watch a movie I had chosen without consulting anyone else's tastes. My phone wasn't ringing with family emergencies. No one was asking me to solve their problems or finance their dreams. For the first time in my adult life, I was living for myself, not for the approval of others. Yes, sometimes it felt lonely. Yes, there were moments when I missed the family interaction, even the conflicts, but it was also authentic in a way my previous life had never been. Every small gesture of independence, every quiet night, every decision made only by myself reminded me of what I had learned. True love does not mean sacrificing your life to cover the failures of others. If this story resonates with you, remember that setting boundaries is not selfishness. Sometimes the most loving way to care for your family is to refuse to enable their worst behaviors. You can love someone without financing their lifestyle. You can support someone without losing yourself in the process. A true family celebrates your successes. It doesn't just benefit from them. I am Laura Ashworth, 31 years old, and I finally learned the difference between being used and being loved. The lesson cost me relationships I thought I could never lose, but it gave me a life I never knew I deserved. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with the people you love most, and those boundaries can be the key to your freedom, your peace, and your happiness. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.